Okay, welcome all to the Games Now lecture of, is it February? I hope so, from Aalto University. And today we will be looking at the new turns of audio design in games, and we will have Paul Weir talking about the subject. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So, thank you very much. So, some of you already know me from my game audio workshops that I run here. So, like once a year, I come here and run the module in game audio. But in my real life, I'm a composer and sound designer and audio director, working mostly in games, although some of the things I'll show you aren't just about games. So really, I work at where technology meets sound design, and it's all very, very fluid. If I speak too quickly, or if I'm not clear enough, because I come from Liverpool, which I'm very sorry about, just tell me, okay? So don't suffer in silence. I know you're Finns, some of you are Finns anyway. So don't be all quiet, just tell me, because sometimes, yes. Oh, don't worry about it, that's fine. So I'll talk for about an hour, hopefully, and then we'll take some questions. If you have a really burning question that you really want me to answer, then please feel free to ask me. Very happy to keep this informal. Or if at the end there's a topic I haven't covered and you'd like to know about, then again, please ask me. I guess I'll put my contact details up somewhere, but Paul Weir, you'll find me, Google me, I'm around. Okay. So I thought what I'll talk about today is I'll split it into 3 sections. I'm going to talk a bit about work I do for Microsoft. So I'm a contract audio director for Microsoft in London. They have a studio just off Oxford Street where I work. I also do a lot of work with a company called the Sound Agency and a guy called Julian Treasure, who maybe a couple of you might have come across. This is more on the generative music installation side. And then I'll talk a little bit about a game called No Man's Sky that I'm working on at the moment, which maybe a few of you have heard. Anyone heard of No Man's Sky? Yay! Loads of people have heard No Man's Sky. Brilliant. If you haven't, you'll know about it by the end, so it'll be fine. Interesting title to work on. There's some things I'm not going to show you now because we're being live streamed, and particularly on No Man's Sky, there's some things that I don't want to publicly show. If you have specific questions and I say I don't want to show that, I'll happily show it to you afterwards. Okay, we'll just keep it private. Unfortunately, that's game development for you. Okay, you have to be a little bit careful about what you do in public. So I've been going for almost 20 years as a professional audio person. I fell into working in game audio. Technically, I'm a TV director. I was trained as a television director. I've never directed any TV in my life. I don't particularly like TV. I actually wanted to work in radio, so I did a slightly bizarre route of becoming a TV director to work in radio, but actually got a job immediately working for a games company as an audio person. So one of the questions I often get asked, if there's any audio people if you're audio people, you know of audio people, is how do I get into the industry? I'm useless for that because I just accidentally fell into it. I'm happy to give you suggestions, but I'm going to assume that most of you aren't audio people, although it'd be useful to have a show of hands. Some of you are, I know some of you are. Yeah, I know you are. Who are audio people here? Okay, fine. You didn't put your hand up there, Jeremy. All right, okay. I know Jeremy from London, which is why I'll keep picking on him, and he's probably going to pick on me. Okay, so I'm going to assume, I'm sorry to you 4, hopefully we'll cover some interesting things, but I'm going to assume you don't know that much about audio, so this will be more of a general introduction to what it's like to work in game audio and some of the jobs we do. So some of my recent games, I've mentioned No Man's Sky. I do a lot of mobile games, so I've got a puzzle game being made by Square Enix, which is coming out very shortly. I've got an Oculus Rift game called Omega Island. There's a trailer of that about to come out maybe this week. Is Xbox launched? Is Xbox launched here? Yes, good, fine, I never know. I don't know, with our launch routine, who knows what Microsoft do. So, has anyone got an Xbox One? Great, look at that. Absolutely no one's got an Xbox One. That's successful marketing by Microsoft. Very good. So one of the main jobs, and I'll cover that in a little bit more detail, is I've worked on an app called Upload Studio, which is their video editing sharing app. So that's some of the work I do for Microsoft. I'll show you that in more detail. That came out a year ago. We've just done an update on that. But before that, I worked on a game called Joe Danger 2, Hello Games, same studio as No Man's Sky. I did work for a couple of years on a new Thief game from 2013, but resigned because it wasn't going the way I wanted it to go. And they wanted to make Assassin's Creed, and I wanted to make Thief, so I left. And then loads of stuff right back to a game called Discworld Noir in the late 90s. So I've been around. And again, I'm old school, so I do the music and sound design. Nowadays, it's a bit more rare to do that. Usually, you will do one or the other. It's not unheard of, particularly mobile titles, to do all of it, but now it's a little bit more fragmentary. So what I'll do, I'll just walk you through the work I do at Microsoft. I'm in quite a good position because I'm a contractor at Microsoft, but I do all the other stuff as well, which is a great position to be in. It's quite unusual. It's a privilege to be like that. And I have, because like with my Microsoft hat, I have a PowerPoint, because you can't mention the word Microsoft without showing you a PowerPoint. It is obligatory, you're taught this. But I have a little, there you go, that's me. So that's the space I work in London. It's quite a nice little space. They basically built me a space because I said I wanted a space in a new building, and they kindly obliged. So we've got 7.1 audio in there. Not particularly high-end, but it's fine. Obviously, if you're doing any console development nowadays, Xbox One, a PS4 is 7.1 output. So previous consoles were 5.1. Basically, you've got surround sound. So if you're going to build a little studio, you need to make sure you've got surround sound. Actually, off here is a little film studio that we have as well. So there's me pretending to look busy. My work at Microsoft would be, as I mentioned, upload. So I'll show you a video of that, but that would be user interface sounds. So that's often ignored. It's not a very glamorous side of the industry, but all games, all apps have to have UI sounds, and that's actually really quite hard to do. To get really comfortable UI sounds that work effectively in an app, it's quite difficult. We've done a lot of videoing, so I do quite a lot of mixing there. But also, if a wider organisation needs me, for example, Lionhead, who make Fable games, then I'll work a bit with them. So I've got a little video to show you. This is a project that was actually cancelled, and yet, bizarrely, they still released a video to show a project that they'd cancelled to show how creative they are, but not creative enough to actually make the game, called Inquest, or Inkwell is what we called it. This was incubated by Lionhead. Microsoft, to their credit, do a lot of what's called incubation work. So they'll start many, many more projects than actually go into production. And sometimes they take them quite far just to see if it's a game worth making. Right? And because they're a big organization, they can afford to do that. Obviously, not all developers are able to do that. So this video, I wrote the music and actually recorded a voiceover in that space that I showed you as well. It's just a good illustration of the kind of work I would do.
A book is more than just words on a page. Mysterious forces work between the folds of a book. Forces that make you laugh or cry. Forces that whisk you away to magical lands of excitement, mystery, and adventure. Most of the time, they let you come back. Most of the time.
I am guard dog. Who disturbs my slumber?
My name's Sophie, said Sophie. Storms are coming. As dusk settled in, Leonard the Lionheart appeared. He had one job: keep the street lamps alight. One job, Leonard. One job. So why not get lost in a good book? Inquest, a Lionhead incubation production. Download it today from lionhead.com.
Lovely. And if anyone like me, if you're of a certain age, you might recognise that voice. Anyone recognise that voice? Do you recognise that voice, Jeremy? It's over big speakers. A guy called Simon Jones, who was famous for being Arthur Dent in The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. That is Simon, who's a wonderful, wonderful man I've worked with many, many, many times. And when he's in London, actually lives down the road from the studio, so he often pops in for a cup of tea, because he does love tea. Absolutely true. So fine. I'll show you this PowerPoint, this Microsoft PowerPoint. This will just run through some of the things that I do in the studio. I've worked with them for a couple of years. As you can see, it's quite varied. The PowerPoint will probably go a bit wrong at some points because I've got lots of embedded video and it's bound not to work properly. It always happens. So now actually we're all called Lift. There's been a bit of reorganisation. So originally there was 2 studios in London, Soho and Lift. I was brought on by Soho, but now I just do audio for the whole studio. They've made various mobile games, haven't quite followed through on. Eden Falls is one which is, has been in production, Secrets and Treasures, Upload I mentioned. When I joined, they were doing Sesame Street. So that was quite interesting. They were doing like an interactive TV version of Sesame Street that was an Xbox game. It came out on the Xbox 360. So it was filmed Sesame Street, but you interacted with it through Kinect. So there was some quite clever video technology which overlaid computer graphics and TV. And no one bought it, but it won lots of awards. And in fact, it won, I believe, the first ever TV BAFTA for a computer game. No one else has done that. So I said I'll do all aspects of audio. I'm going to skip over the next video because I wasn't that involved in Sesame Street. I came at the end. I'll skip over that. When I joined them, they were doing a lot of incubation work, and now we're back into that incubation process. So one thing we incubated, which I will show you, is this branching cartoon called Two Evils. So this is not available. You can't watch this. It was just a test we did to combine hand-drawn animation with Kinect. So at certain key points, you could decide which animation to see next. So you can make simple decisions. And so it's really to test the idea of kind of branching interactive narrative. It was fun for me to work on because I got to do music, sound design, the mixing, the voice production, and actually kind of help bring it all together and some of the tech as well. So I'll show you a short version of that. All I've done is I've cut together some arbitrary choices, right? Because obviously I don't have a Kinect here, you can't choose. So I've just taken certain paths. So you'll see at certain points a decision's been made, right? And that's what would happen if you were to play this.
Wake up, numpty. Morning, sleepyhead. Oh, no. You two already? You know, you're only supposed to show up when there's a decision to be made. But my breath will stink. Don't brush your teeth. Fine. Well done. And we're on his shoulder all day. Nah, it'll be all right. Hi. Oh, no. You're right. That is bad. Ah, why don't you have a seat? There. And a seat for this gentleman. And one for you, madam. And for you, sir. Huh? Hi.
Right. And the challenge on that one is, the challenge on that, when you've got a branching narrative, is to make sure that all the sections meet up really nicely. So if I know that there are 3 options, then I have to make sure that the music and the mix is all completely smooth in between those sections. So a lot of the music thematically will be consistent and will link. So it's a challenge, you know, but it's different working like that, which is pre-rendered, from working on something that's heavily interactive, which we'll get to. So as I briefly mentioned, Upload has been a big project for Microsoft, which most people don't know about, unless you're someone who uses it, in which case generally users like it a lot. It was fascinating to be involved in Microsoft when they were launching a console. I've never been actually inside like a Microsoft or a Sony when they're getting ready to launch a console. It's chaos. It's really interesting because you're trying to make technology for a platform that's evolving and changing at the same time. And that's really, really hard. So every time you do something, it could break, and it's not your fault when it breaks. You have to kind of keep up with that cycle. So the challenge we had, we were very keen that game players could use the game DVR, use the recorder built into the Xbox, record game clips as they're playing, and then not just upload the game clips as raw footage, but be able to bring it into an editor, to edit it, to put special effects on it, to put different clips together, to use the Kinect to do a voiceover. So that's what Upload Studio did. From an audio perspective, I mentioned UI sounds, but a lot of the effects have audio as well, which I'll show you in another video. But also behind the scenes, we developed some DSP, some audio algorithms. The problem I thought we were going to have, and we did have, fortunately we solved it, was on the Kinect, we never know how loud someone's going to be if they're going to record a voiceover, right? Nor do we know how loud the game is. So somehow we have to magically mix game with Kinect video footage or with headset voiceover and make the whole thing come out the other end in a way that's really, really low CPU. So we didn't have much CPU to play with and low memory. You know, if you're audio people, then on your DAW, whatever you use, Pro Tools, whatever, it knows ahead, it looks ahead, and it understands what's about to happen, but we didn't have that, right? So we had to do everything almost as live. So we kind of developed our own really simple auto mixing algorithms for doing, which was handwritten code. So that's what I'm going to show you now. It's kind of a simple way of understanding some of the code that we built to make it work. So, first of all, this is the app. This is about a year old now, so we've got a lot more users. I mean, literally, we've got tens of millions of users. I say it's not something that, like, outside the Xbox ecosystem people are aware of, but for those who do have an Xbox One, actually, it's very well liked. It's used a lot. And Sony have their equivalent on PS4. So there's a little bit of kind of one-upmanship between Microsoft and Sony. I think Sony partly committed to doing it because they saw Microsoft were doing it, and it's really interesting because Microsoft were very close to not doing it. So all the kind of video editing tools very nearly didn't happen at all, but they have been successful. So this is probably the easiest way of understanding kind of what we programmed and the challenge we had. So at the top, that's just a volume display of some game. I don't know what game, it doesn't matter. So that's, games are usually pretty loud. Now it's getting better, but certainly in the old days, it was rare to properly mix a game in kind of relative mix terms. so that a lot of games would be really, really loud, like all the way through. They wouldn't have very great dynamic range. Actually, that one's not too bad, but still, loud game. And then second line is someone recording a voiceover or recording a picture, video feed. And again, that could be all over the place. You could have a really quiet person or a really loud person, you don't know. So we have two jobs to do. One is to automatically level off the connect voice recording, or it could be headset, which that third line is done. So that third line is exactly the same recording as the second line, but with our processing on it. So it brings everything up to an average level. And then it does what's called side chaining. So then impose that on top of a game mix. And whenever there's voice, it will automatically reduce and level the game mix. Right? Which is, if you ever listen to the radio, that's what you get with radio. It's a classic audio technique. It uses a sidechain compressor so that the audio never gets in the way of the voice, because the voice is the most important. You have to hear what someone's saying. And then we just merge the two of them. A little bit more complicated than that, but not terribly more complicated than that. So what I'll show you next are some videos we shot when we were prototyping it. I'm going to tell you now, they're really awful and really glitchy. But that goes back to what I was saying. If you're working with technology and development, it is glitchy. That's what you have to live with. So the glitches you hear are not in the final, connect. That's not what it's like, but it was what it was like when we were developing for it. And I haven't got a beard in these videos, so it's a bit scary.
Hey, right, check it out, right? What are these cogs on her bum for? I don't understand what that's all about.
So level's
He's
fine,
just
that's
looking
good.
for some loose change there. He's found...
That's Lyndon. She speaks really quietly. Very quiet on Lyndon.
We're testing the sound for the Connect voice capture and watching a race game.
Okay, fine. So that was just an example we were trying to record. That was on the prototype Connect. Then we auto-mix it,
right, check it out,
auto-balance
right?
it.
What are these cogs on her
That's
bum
good.
for? I don't understand.
Okay, I'm
Now that's Lyndon.
going on a little go-kart
That's
track.
much better now.
There's some I really don't like. Ooh, I just went under. We're testing the sound for the Connect voice capture and watching
So you can see visually, and you can hear as well.
Right,
They're all
out,
of the same
what are these
level,
cogs
more or
on her
less.
bum for? I don't understand.
Okay, I'm
And it's looping.
going on a little go-kart track, and there's some I really don't
We'll
like.
skip over this. Fine. So don't show you all the videos, but you can hear there. Lyndon was really, really quiet. Now Lyndon's up, and actually you can't hear the algorithm bringing it up, and that's the other key part. Us audio people were very sensitive to that. If we hear a compressor, if we hear levels being raised automatically, and you actually hear the process, it's very annoying. We don't like it. I want it to feel natural. So that is all part of it. Really, I'm showing that by way of illustration to say that, okay, most of my work is creative and it's in production, but actually there's quite a strong technical element to it as well. I am not a programmer. I've never programmed in my life, but obviously I work a lot with programmers. And I always used to say as a game audio person, it was most important to be creative and you didn't have to be a programmer. I'm kind of changing that now. I think nowadays increasingly you have to understand programming. You don't have to be a programmer, but you have to understand how programmers work, and be able to talk their language. I think that's increasingly important. Despite the fact that actually we have tools that are incredibly powerful, like audio kinetics wires and FWAD. But still, to understand them, it really helps to know the programmer mindset. So that's my work in Microsoft, very quickly, so I can run through a lot. I could take any questions if anyone's got any burning questions, but I would be surprised if anyone has, because everyone's quiet. Stay awake, that's all I can ask. Okay, fine. Then I'll go onto the generative side. So it just happens that I do a lot of generative music. And what I mean by generative is that it's live created based on rules. Okay, so it could be fully generative, which would be algorithmic. So we could have a completely programmer's method of generating sound, or it could be what I do, which is basically it's a randomized file system with a bit of music logic stuck on top. And where I do a lot of this work is actually not in games, although I do it in games as well, but in installations. So I do a lot of commercial music installations, particularly shopping centers, banks, I do a lot of those. I do a load of those, where instead of just playing whatever music happens to be piped through, whatever is current, or whatever the manager of a store happens to have on CD, we'll go in and actually sound design the space. It could be a huge space. So one of the ones we've done is Harrods. I'll show you some examples of that. That was a little while ago in London. I do a lot in Europe. I've just done a shopping centre in Austria. I'm just doing one in Germany at the moment. And that could be broken down into the main space. Now with these modern shopping centres, they often have like these display areas. So the one I've just done in, I think it's Austria, they've got this kind of green wall with foliage coming off it, and it's all kind of nice and pretty and eco and lovely. So there we've actually got different loops, but also a generative background to it. So sound can come from particular points in the wall. I've just done one in Britain where, and I might be wrong on where it is, but there's like a little stream that runs through a shopping centre, but it doesn't make much sound. So across the bridge, we've got some very gentle kind of water running, but also some music behind that. And on that one, we're using hypersonic speakers. And hypersonics are really interesting because they're directional. So unlike normal speakers, which will just flood sound, these are, it'd be a bit quieter behind than in front, but it's not that much difference. With hypersonics, it's more like light, like a spotlight. And so you only hear them when they actually bounce on a surface, usually you. So it's a very weird experience. So if you cross a hypersonic beam, the sound is coming from you, physically coming from you. If it hits your head, it's a bit like wearing headphones, but you're not wearing headphones. And you go a bit mad after a while. It's really weird. But they're great because outside of a beam, you hear it a little bit, but it's vastly reduced. So really interesting technology to use. Those who like military stuff, you'll know there are sonic weapons, like cruise ships use sonic weapons. It's based on the same kind of technology, where you beam a really, really powerful, loud sound at the people who are attacking your ship. And there was a ship that did that a few years ago and fought off pirates because of that. So it does work, but that's not what we do. We do the opposite. We're nice. So we have our own custom technology for doing this called the amplifier, which, again, if you're on the programming side, it's actually written C sound or real-time C sound, RTC sound. So it's a C-like language. The reason we chose C sound for this particular job is it's old and therefore very, very stable. It's well understood, it's open source. So actually what we deliver to the client is a Linux rack server, which has all our software installed. We just insert a USB stick, it automatically installs. It's then listened on the network, and as soon as we network it, it pops up on our portal. We can sit there, and then we can put music onto it. So I can actually control the music and shopping centres across Europe from my laptop, which gives me great power, which I have to be careful not to abuse. But it's interesting, like I can see what's happening in a particular space. I can't hear it yet. So another really interesting aspect, and something we want to do more of, is going there and actually mixing on site. That's really quite important. So there have been times, like the worst one I've done was in North London. There's a shopping centre called Brent Cross, which is relatively well-known in London. It's quite close to where I live. And I did the sound design for the toilets. Right. Pinnacle of my career, sound design toilets. So I had to go in there. It sounds all wrong, but you know what I mean. I had to go into the toilet and actually kind of mix it on my laptop and then send it back to the server and then kind of go out and slightly odd, but it's really interesting what you can get away with if you look professional. Like, if you just look like you belong there or wear a yellow jacket, high-vis jacket, you can do anything, absolutely anything. So we do that, Harrods, we did that a lot, going back on site, waiting for basically Harrods to close. So several times I was there after 10 o'clock at night. The security in Harrods is phenomenal. I mean, not surprising. So every single second we get security kind of coming down on us, even though we're meant to be there. But that presents a challenge because then I'm sound designing for an empty space, but it's not empty during the day. So there's a whole load of kind of really difficult challenges in doing that work. I'm not going to go into any more detail than that. Happy to answer questions, but I'll show you some examples of what we do. I do this actually through a company called the Sound Agency. And there's a guy called Julian Treasure who runs the Sound Agency. If you're interested in this area, he's done lots of TED Talks. I would recommend you listen to the TED Talks anyway. In fact, I have a link up here. It's Jules, fine, he's had millions of views. And he talks a lot about the effect, in a really interesting way, the effect that sound has on people, on how we communicate, on education. So if you're interested, jot his name down, Julian Treasure, TED, very easy to find. So Jules is a guy that I will work with. I can leave that up for now. So we're often called in when banks or shops are doing a rebuild or building new. That's the best time for us to go in because then we can have plans of a space, we can specify which speakers and what goes where, and we can understand why it is they want the sound, what their brand values are, and things like this. So it's very much from a marketing perspective. This is not an art installation. This is completely commercial. And Harrods is quite interesting. I can show you the plan for the toy floor of Harrods. Not sure how much you'll get to see this, but now obviously I can rotate. How do I rotate on this? Oh, there we go. Fine. If you've worked in games, that is not dissimilar from a level design. Right? I mean, it's hand-drawn, but basically that's a level design. So actually, kind of I approach it very much from a game perspective, which is I've got spaces, they're adjacent spaces, so they need to be complementary to each other. I know where my sound sources are going to come from. So in this case, it would be speakers. I've got ambient sound sources, so stuff that will be piped across a large space. And I've got point sources as well, so you can't really see them here, but it's hand-drawn in there. But for things like a little fairy in a plant pot, right? And that would have its own sound. The fairy would speak to you every now and again. Or we had, in another one, we had some children who would only play across certain speakers near the corridor. And then frequently, that was really interesting because you'd be browsing, and then suddenly these children would kind of run past you, like on the speakers, because of the way we panned it. And that was really weird because it felt so positional. They're almost like ghost children, which is the best kind of children. So anyway, a lot of sound design in that space, a mixture between generative and rendered. I've got a little film. I'm not going to show you all 4 minutes, but it'll give you an idea as to what that space sounded like, and then I'll show you the tech behind it.
Roll up, roll up, roll up, boys and girls, mums and dads, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome, one and all, to the magical world of the circus. See the crowd.
Quite quick, but you get an idea how diverse that is, and actually how much like a game it is in many ways, particularly given it was a toy department, but we've done other departments as well. So I mentioned behind that is our system called the amplifier. So I can show you an example of that. Yeah, don't worry about understanding what's going on here. I can talk you through it. So this is, it's real time, but it's non-interactive. Okay, we've kind of deliberately designed this version to be non-interactive. It could be interactive. And essentially, all I'm doing is grouping together sounds into categories. And you can actually see, like with my WAV files, I've got a bunch of chords, some drones, and melody, effects, blah, 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 so on. And then I'm imposing a little bit of logic. It doesn't come across very well on the screen, so let's bring it down a bit, see if that works. No, not really. Anyway, there's a little bit of logic here where I can then say, and you don't have to read this, but I can then say how often a particular sound is going to play, where it's going to pan, how loud the sound's going to be. I can even repitch it in real time, so I can say it belongs to a certain scale, and then choose a different note in that scale. So it's actually kind of really simplistic. And on this, where this system's been designed, and it's not ideal, it actually didn't work in beats. So if you're a musician, you want to work in beats with a tempo, this just works in time, so it works in seconds. So I'll say within a minimum number of seconds and between a maximum number of seconds, a sound has to play, so a chord has to play. Right. But actually you can get some quite nice results out of that. I'm really interested in this idea of, like, personally I would call it emergent audio rather than generative, but that's a bit pretentious. But I like the idea that it seems to be more complex than it actually really is. I'm working on a brand new system for No Man's Sky, which is way more complex than this, and actually is much more musically aware and interconnected than this system is. We're just starting to build that. But I can play this and hopefully it will run and won't do anything horrible. So it's just a thing of scanning everything first so it knows what's going to come up. It's quite a big one, this one. I had to choose the biggest. But this is, the scary stuff is actually the logic. So this is all the code to make it play. So we separate off the code to make it play from the actual music files, which makes a lot of sense. So I'm not breaking the logic every time I change the music logic. The worst I could do is have a piece that just doesn't play. I'm not breaking the whole logic. The other advantage of this approach, not that we've fully exploited it, is because, if you like, the logic system and the music system form part of the composition, we can change the logic system on a per-piece basis. So that could be completely new logic. It could be just new effects. So I could introduce, like, I don't know, filters or reverbs, which are specific to a piece. And being that it's C sound behind, reading it, it couldn't care less. It would just work. This is taking absolutely ages. I've stressed it. There we go. Oh, no. It's given up because it's run out of memory. I knew that was going to happen. Let me start it. I was an idiot for choosing a big one. I'll play this one with a caveat that this particular one is quite unusual. So normally they are quite ambient because ambient music works so well in this kind of genre because essentially it can have a very fluid structure. But we have just done one for the Austrian shopping centre, which is basically like light jazz. So if you're allergic to jazz, like I am, you might find this painful. Okay, I'm just going to forewarn you. But actually, as a challenge, it's quite interesting. That's fine. That's absolutely fine. I know why it does that. Because, unlike ambient music, jazz has more of a relationship between, more of a structure. There we go. So I've got a bunch of piano phrases, some guitar, bass, and so forth, drones, not that many. So the order of every phrase that you're hearing, whether it's bass or guitar, is completely randomized. Right? So the bass has no idea what the piano's doing. Right? It's jazz, so you get away with it, right? No one cares. The other thing that our system's not set up to do rhythms, I said it has not tempo, but I've got some hi-hat and some actually, I think I've got hi-hat in it. Might have bass drum in it as well. And the only way of hacking that is by telling it every thousandth of a second to try and play another rhythmic section. So anything that's timed, I've cut all those sounds to exactly the same length. So let's say for sake of argument it's 12 seconds, let's say it's 2 bars. Okay? And all the time it's going, am I playing, am I playing, am I playing? If the answer is yes, it doesn't play anything else. If the answer is no, every thousandth of a second, it will try and play another one. And so because that interval's short enough, it kind of all keeps in time. It will keep in time for hours, it will never go out of time. So it feels like it's kind of making sense when it makes sense. But again, as humans, it's really interesting. You know, we love patterns, we recognize patterns even when there aren't patterns. So we kind of find, if I hadn't told you that, you would have thought, oh, well, this kind of, it is what it is. Bad jazz, which is what it is. And that piano is a physically modelled piano. It's piano tech that I use to do a piano. So that is not a recorded piano, that's a synthesized piano, modelled, which really well, and I didn't intend that, really well takes me onto No Man's Sky in terms of physically modelling and procedural audio. Look at that. So for those who don't know the game, I'll show you a video. I apologise if you have seen it. No. Okay. What we've said so far about the game is it's a procedurally generated space action adventure game. So we generate via algorithms a galaxy, literally a galaxy. There are billions of planets for you to visit. And the player of the game starts on the edge of a galaxy, and you have to make your way to the center of the galaxy. Every planet is unique, so it's created on the fly when you're close enough to that planet. But it will look like a real planet with life forms. Some planets will have life forms, creatures. They've got their own night-to-day cycles. Some planets will be barren, because the fact is most planets in the galaxy would be barren. You know, if we were completely realistic, you'd hardly ever find a planet with anything on. But we're a game. There seems to be a lot of interest in this title, which is lovely. And one of the things I think we're doing, which I don't think anyone's done before, is, and you'll see in the video, that you can be on a space station, you can be flying through space, and you can seamlessly land on a planet, and at no point does the game ever stop. You can go wherever you want within our galaxy. If you're on a planet and you see in the sky a star or another planet, that is a planet you can visit. Okay? So most games, like you're running around, you see something in the sky, it's just an image, right? It's a static image that, like a photo box thing. Okay? You're constrained. Right? No, if you can see it in our game, you can visit it. As to what you find, depends what the computer decides. So I said, let's build this world. Now that, clearly as a sound designer, presents some really interesting issues. If there are creatures on all planets, like, what do they sound like? What is an alien creature going to sound like? And what's a creature that I don't even know what it's going to look like sound like? So that's a problem. Because the ships, the creatures are procedurally generated. As much as we can do is procedurally generated. Within confines, within boundaries. Right? It shouldn't ever do anything that's totally broken. Right? So we set what those confines are. So I have a couple of videos from Christmas. The question is, how are we doing time? We've got a longer video, about 4 minutes, and a short video. I'll do the short video. on with it. And a little bit for Jeremy. So that robot standing up is the Remedy elevator. I was so pleased to record the elevator because it makes such a good noise. And Jeremy told me to record it. As I said, like the creatures you can just about hear in that video, they are already being procedurally created for sound. What we are literally doing this week is integrating our technology into the game audio engine. We're using Wise for game audio people. So we can run it all completely real time in the game. Has to be low CPU. But I think we've got some really interesting tech there where we can basically model any vocal tract at all. So in the game, we will look at what creature type it is, what size it is. There's a defined number of creature types, although visually they'll look quite different to you. What their emote state is, are they angry, are they attacking, are they dying? And then we'll just take these numbers, these parameters, and create a sound for you. You know, hopefully an appropriate sound, but weird things might happen. And actually one of the things that we were exploring last week, and it turns out works surprisingly well, is it looking like we'll be able to model birds and things at the same time, because it kind of falls out of the same model. We just need a bit more logic to do that. So if we get there, that'd be fantastic. Still quite a way to go. But from a procedural perspective, it's kind of quite important because like we need more procedural audio. We need to push this area forward. One of the things I can show you, I'll just be a little bit careful about how, but I'll just very quickly show you an example of Wise. Okay, just like if you're not audio people at all or techie, like this might scare you a bit. It's fine. I'm not going to go through it properly. I just want to very, very quickly illustrate a few things. We'll do it from here. Okay. So this is called Wise. So it's an audio middleware tool. It's what a lot of games will use for controlling the logic and playback of sounds. And it will scale across platform. So you only have to do it once, and then it will work on PS4, iOS. It will work whatever platform it's been built for. So it makes managing different platforms vastly easier than in the old days. But it also means that as a sound designer, I can impose quite a lot of logic and make a lot of audio systemic rather than absolute. So in other words, if something happens in a game, it doesn't just have to trigger a sound. I can then define a whole lot of behaviors based on that trigger. So programmers quite like it because it's less work for them. Sound designers like it because they've got more control, and we like control. We do all the mixing, everything lives inside Wise. I'm not going to go through everything because there's stuff in there that's sensitive, but I'll show you a good example of why a tool like this is quite powerful. This is what this is called a Soundcaster session. Basically, this is like a stage, okay? And on here, you put down your audio events, and you can preview them. So in theory, and usually in practice, I can drag events out, stick them here, and what I hear in this space should be exactly the same as what I hear in game. And in this space, I can control those real-time behaviors as well. So I can build, for us, I can build my spaceship engines. I'll show you an example of a ship landing, and change the behaviors, and then know that that is what the game's going to pick up on. But because it's systemic, I can create new behaviors. So a really good example would be, I've got a spaceship. It's an NPC, so it's not you. It's a computer-generated spaceship. And at the moment, I can land, say, on a planet and on a space station. But actually, we've now just allowed you to land on asteroids, for example. I'm not saying you can, but for example. Asteroids isn't in there, but I can simply write asteroids, define what sounds go with that for the player ship, just tell the programmer we now have a new surface called asteroids, and then everything will permeate through. So we don't actually ever need to, apart from putting one label asteroids as a new surface type, we don't need to do anything else. All the behaviors will sit in here. So the sound designer can do it. So for example, here I've got my locations in space. In fact, let's do a space station. And my ship is going to land, so if I play that. That's fine, lovely. And I've got random variations. If I play it again, whatever. But if I switch to being on the surface of a planet, game itself is just going play ship landing, play ship landing, play ship landing, but where am I? I'm on the surface. Okay. So they're the 2 bits of logic it only ever needs. So I don't have, for example, I might have 20 different ship types and 20 different locations. That would be like previously in the old days when there's a one-on-one relationship, that would be loads and loads of events for every single possibility, every permutation. I don't need that. I need one event. And all my permutations will live in the logic system over here. So that's why, like, for a game like No Man's Sky, doing something that's systemic is just, we have to do it that way. I mean, we couldn't do it any other way. Fmod is a bit more one-on-one relationship, unless anyone wants to argue against that. Wise is better at this kind of switch system. But also we have these controllers. So if I very quickly show you another example. So this is your ship, and all these sounds may change before we get it released for game. But you say, enter your ship. I've got 2 enters there. Just bring that down, actually. Bring that down. So fine, I enter my ship, and actually what that does is then say, okay, play the cockpit sound, but actually start the engines up as well, because there's a one-on-one relationship. And then I can play with different engine speeds, thrust, height, fine, and then if I land, I suspect that's the wrong. Yeah, I've broken it somewhere wherever it usually works. I've broken it. That's what happens. But then if I was to play the landing sound, it would know to turn off the engine sound and to play the whole landing sequence, all sorts. So again, like that's just a really simple example of a game audio engine. So just briefly going back to the creatures, what I can show you, because this has been published. So the game itself will generate creatures based on these archetypes. So these are a few early examples we've got. And we have a tool that does all this. Some kind of mammalian fish type. And here's an early version of the tool. Literally, we can have a creature type go, we like that, now spawn variations of that, and it will create immediately all these variations. I mean, as you can see, they're not just different colours, they're different shapes, but they roughly belong to the same class. And the same applies to the ships as well. Ships will all be one-man ships. They'll all have, you'll sit in the middle, they'll all have engines, and they'll be of a certain dimension. But as to where those engines lie, as to what type of engines, of the colours and the shape, that will be random variables based on that. All this tech they've made themselves, the engine, the 3D engine they've made themselves, so everything is kind of handwritten. And up until recently, they've been 10 people. So that's another reason why like, a lot of people are interested in the game. It's an immense amount of work. It's really interesting. 10 people have done it, and now we've grown to 14. So that's big. That's the biggest we've ever been. It would not be unusual on a game to have more than 14 people, say, on level design on AAA title. I mean, I'm not going to ask you how many you've got on level design, but probably 12. Okay, yeah. Fine, yeah. So to have a whole team doing everything, that's 14 people, is quite phenomenal. But they are very, very clever people, and there's me. But everyone else is really super clever. Fine, so that's actually a really neat hour. I think I've done like all the essential things. I am very happy to take questions from you. Please do ask questions. I know Jeremy's definitely going to ask a question, just to break the ice. But don't let him hog the microphone. Everyone can ask questions. So, you will have some questions, but you don't want to ask. I know it's like, I never want to ask questions. That's why Jeremy has to ask the first one. See the pressure I'm putting on you?
How how much actual raw assets are you creating for all the generative stuff? Is any of it actually synthesized by the game itself?
So yeah, so all creature vocals will be synthesized. Like, I mean, I say this, you know, things could go horribly wrong, and we might have to ditch it. At the moment, all creature vocals, all creature sounds will be synthesized. Because we've created a kind of, I guess in some ways, a general purpose synthesis engine, although it's designed for vocals, actually it could be repurposed in lots of different ways. So conceivably, some engine auditors could be synthesized as well. I'd love to do that. It depends on the time scale we have. So yeah, I'd definitely love to look at what engine types have we got and where they're physically positioned, and then do real-time synthesis for those engines. Technically, there's no reason we can't do that. It's just a bit of extra time to implement it. If you've got any other ideas what we should be synthesizing, I'd happily synthesize. The hard stuff like Foley, like footsteps, you know, use samples. I mean, it's not one or the other, right? You use whatever is most suitable. There are some purists who would love to kind of procedurally create everything. I'm definitely not in that camp. I think a lot of the procedural audio I've heard has not been terribly inspiring. A good example is people frequently synthesize, say, wind and rain. They're the two classics as procedural demos. You can do wind, a bit of white noise, a bit of filtering, rain, some noise based on sine waves, it could be, you know, whatever. But the problem is, as a sound designer, all sounds have character. They've got a life to them. Wind's not just wind, you know. There are lots and lots of different flavors of wind. And I know in my recordings, I've got some really fabulous winds that I've recorded in the forest or through a crack in a window. Last night, I'm staying at Tulu, like with a ventilation pipe. Yeah, it's lovely kind of whistling, quite distorted wind sounds. Lovely, right? You know, sound has character. So although I might appear quite technical, I come from it very much from an aesthetic perspective, and I'm not interested in doing something for the sake of doing it, which is partly why procedural audio has not quite made the inroads it could do yet. But like our creature stuff, yes, you'll know it's synthesized. It's not going to trick most of you. It will trick some people. It has tricked some people. I don't care about that. But we're getting some really interesting sounds out of it. And actually, sometimes some quite emotive sounds out of it. That's what I love. As a sound designer, that's what I want. Okay. Other questions? Yeah, great.
Would you like to talk a little bit more in depth about the creature sounds, and how do you design creature sound that you don't know what it looks like? Like you mentioned aesthetics and different.
Yeah. So okay. So I'll be a little bit vague. Like went a bit further down the line. I mean, we've pretty well finished the modelling of it, but obviously, like, I mean, I can demonstrate it to you later. But being live streamed is some stuff I don't want to show. However, how we approach it. Actually, if you look online, there's quite a lot of research already on how vocal tracts work. Right? There's loads of stuff, and that feeds into speech synthesis. The problem is, when you listen to a lot of what they come out with, it's really horrible, because that's not their intention. Right? Their intention are scientific models. You know, how do vocal tracts work? And they're very similar to saxophones, basically. There's voice box acts like a reed. There are resonant chambers. So sound will feed back and feed forward as well. So you set up these kind of resonant nodes. All that stuff is well understood. Right? We're not completely inventing stuff here. But obviously where we're trying to go, and what's really, really fascinating, is the performance aspect. Like, and I haven't really talked about that, but it's not just making a sound, it's making the sound, making the sound perform. So right from the beginning, like a lot of the tech we've developed has been as a performance tool. So it could be, for example, at the moment, I've got it running on my Xbox controller. I can perform it on a controller. We're just moving over, hopefully this week, to using like maybe an iPhone or iOS or maybe Android, doesn't matter. But using a gyroscope in a phone, so we can have three-dimensional control. So we're just sending MIDI through three-dimensional. We might well end up, because my programmer, a guy called Sandy White, who is totally genius, he also physically builds devices. So he did a lot of animatronic work. So he might actually end up building me like some toy that I can manipulate to create it. So half of it is the tool, but we're kind of at the point where the tool is okay. Kind of we can see it's going to work. The other aspect is performance, and we're just beginning to kind of answer those questions in terms of performance. And one idea, again, I might not absolutely do this, but one idea is we perform with the tool, we get sounds we like, we capture that performance, we use that as a seed for the system. So the system won't absolutely play my performance, like I don't want it to do that, but it will go, okay, that's a raw, it's a really nice raw, create variations of the data for that raw. So, and we might just use MIDI for that, because MIDI works. It's such a familiar protocol. But it is fascinating. It's like, and so I know that the guys at Aalto, on the procedural audio side, they're also really heavily looking into performance aspect, because it is so critical for this. Good question, really good question. Anything else? Yeah.
Yeah, about spaceships, you showed some states and RTBCs, but what about the creators then? What do you get from the game? Which parameters?
Any parameters we want. One of the nice things about building our own game engine is like we can get any data at all. So I can request data, and we may not be displaying it, but then we will if we need it. So again, we're literally just doing first pass on this, that with the editor, all the audio stuff should be in the editor. So we should be able to go into the editor, create a new creature, get it to raw, get it to attack, and it will create all the numbers that we need to play the audio at the same time. We can look at the audio, the vocal model, make tweaks to that, and save it all off together. So it should be completely integrated, which is kind of what we want, right? Is, you know, game people. Sometimes it's difficult, like with systems like Unreal, where you really have to work hard to get some of that data out of it. We don't. I mean, so what I would love to do, and again, it's a bit early, we're not doing it yet, but I'd love to drive the creature animations, the lip flapping, from the audio. Totally no reason why we couldn't do that. We already know what the energy is going into the vocal tract, so we know what sound we're going to create. You know, we know those numbers. So why shouldn't the data go the other way? Rather than the game engine to us, we can go into the game engine. And then we don't have to worry about lip syncing, because we are making lip syncing. Anything else? Is that enough? Have you had enough?
I would be interested in hearing your take on, I mean, you've been working on lots of different kinds of games, and as game designers and game developers, we have this tension between kind of a linear experience where we can control things much more, and then this kind of more procedural and rule-based gaming experience, and then usually you kind of lose some of the control. So have you been working on both kind of projects, and how do you live in that tension, and which do you prefer in a way, or do you find good sides about both of them?
I think this thing of linear versus non-linear, I think it's like a false dichotomy. I mean, there is no tension. It's absolutely fine. And personally, nothing gives me more pleasure than setting up a system and seeing it run, and it comes out with something you didn't expect. That's absolutely brilliant. And that's really what I want from our generative music system. And I won't talk about it now because literally I've done the paper design, we're just beginning to build it. But really, unlike previous systems, I've built it very much from the aspect that I don't want to know what it's going to do. Like, I want it to be within certain boundaries, I want it to make sense, but I want it to come out with stuff that I didn't design it to do. Versus, and in the same game, No Man's Sky, we have a band called 65 Days of Static, who have just been recording like the soundtrack for it. We're making an album for it. That'll be completely linear, although it will also be broken down into layers, and some of that stuff will then go into the generative music system as well. So in fact, their work will run everything from completely traditional through to completely generative. And it depends on the game. There's no right or no wrong. Some games are heavily linear and really benefit from a linear approach. I'm lucky that I'm working on No Man's Sky, but it's just pure coincidence because I'd already worked with them before. I kind of knew them and I was probably going to work on it anyway, but I happen to have all this experience with generative systems and procedural audio. So that was kind of fortuitous. That was not designed. It just happened to be the way. If I hadn't been working on it, I would have kind of asked to work on it. Right? So it's just a great way of doing it. But I love both. And you say like Microsoft stuff, like most of the traditional work I've done has been completely linear. I do a lot of linear work. But anything else before we... Yes, question at the back. We always have to have a question at the back. It's obligatory.
Hello. Just in general, what do you see being the future of the procedural audio? What are the hiccups, where it will develop? What are the hard problems to solve?
Yeah, I hate these future questions. Like, I always get asked, like, what's the future? I don't know. I think the hard problem to solve is still justifying the use of procedural audio, because it's expensive in terms of development time. Right? There's no tool out there which you can just pick up and use and implement. Probably a few of you, maybe you, use Pure Data. PD is absolutely fine. It's a good prototype environment. And I know there's technologies now, like Heavy, which will take a PD patch and convert it into C++. That's great. That's certainly a step in the right direction. But I wouldn't use PD. I'm not that techie. And it doesn't, at the moment, create readable C++, which, from my game programming perspective, I want really clean code. I have to deliver clean code. So certainly tools is a challenge. Justifying the time, the cost is a challenge. And then making it sound great, making it sound aesthetically pleasing, creatively pleasing. That's awesome. They're all solvable problems. And to a certain degree, it needs a game. Hopefully it's No Man's Sky, but maybe another game that comes out which kind of goes, well, we've done this, it's great, it works. You don't need to know it's procedural, but it is. And that will kind of bring things along a little bit. Certainly there's a lot, as you probably know, there's a lot of movement, there's a lot of will to do it. It hasn't quite kind of managed to break through quite yet. But GTA 5 did it really successfully. So there's quite a lot of audio in GTA 5, which actually is real-time synthesized. Again, players don't need to know that, totally irrelevant. I did a game called Ghostmaster in 2003, I think, which is a great game. You can still buy it, lovely game. And that had a really simple generative music system built into it. And no one ever knew. I didn't tell anyone. No one needed to know, except I got a lot of great reviews for music. And people said, oh, your music, I kind of didn't turn it off. I was like, great, because that's what we were trying to achieve, because it was a kind of randomized granular system, right? So that's, I'm trying to create something that's really satisfying and pleasurable for the game player. Right. Is that it? Okay, as I said, I'm very, very happy if you've got stuff you want to ask me, like later on, outside of this formal setting, to answer any questions. But otherwise, thank you very much for coming, and I'll see you over there, hopefully. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. And as usual, we will have our little